When people talk about strange things happening in the world, most stories usually fade away with time. But this story began quietly, almost softly, on a night when nothing unusual was expected. It started at a small observatory on a hill, where a group of sky watchers were doing what they always did, checking signals, reviewing data, and hoping to find something interesting enough to report in the morning. They never imagined that one ordinary night would mark the beginning of something that would change how humanity thought about the universe. The first person who noticed anything unusual was a senior researcher who had spent more than half of life studying stars. The team respected this person because they had a calm way of working and rarely got excited over small findings. But that night, they suddenly leaned closer to the monitor with a confused look. The screen showed a weak signal coming from a distant part of the sky. At first glance, it looked like background noise, something that usually gets deleted automatically. But the pattern in the signal wasn't random. It repeated in a strange rhythm that didn't match anything known from nature. Most natural signals, like those from pulsars or galaxies, follow predictable patterns. But this one was almost thoughtful. It had a shape to it, a structure that hinted it was created on purpose. The researcher didn't say anything right away. Instead, they called over another colleague and quietly pointed at the screen. Within minutes, more people gathered around. The room, usually filled with soft typing and low conversations, suddenly turned silent. They ran the signal through different systems to make sure it wasn't an error. But every test said the same thing: it was real. It was coming from far beyond the usual areas humans study, from a distance no human-made device could ever reach. It wasn't a reflection. It wasn't interference. And it definitely wasn't one of their own satellites. Some of the younger assistants were excited and whispered to each other, thinking they had discovered something historic. But the older members of the team exchanged worried glances. They all knew what this could mean. A signal like that doesn't come out of nowhere. Something or someone had to send it. The team reported the finding to a global scientific network. At first, other observatories didn't take it too seriously. Strange signals show up all the time. Most turn out to be technical glitches. But when two more observatories detected the same pattern from the same direction, the situation changed immediately. Suddenly, this wasn't just a local discovery. It was now a global concern. Within hours, private messages started flying between major scientific centers around the world. Everyone was analyzing the data, running it through their own systems, comparing notes. A few people insisted the pattern was too perfect to be natural. Others argued there must be some unknown cosmic explanation. But nobody could deny that the signal repeated in a way that felt intentional. Soon, government agencies got involved. They didn't announce anything. They didn't send out statements. They simply contacted the observatory teams quietly and asked for every recording, every report, every detail. Some of the scientists felt uneasy. This was the kind of discovery that should have belonged to everyone, not something to be locked away behind secret meetings. But once governments step in, there's not much a small observatory can do. Meanwhile, the researchers kept studying the signal. They noticed geometric shapes inside the transmission shapes that didn't appear in any known natural signal. Circles inside squares, repeating lines, and a kind of numerical rhythm that looked like counting. It was like someone out there was trying to send a message, but didn't know how to speak our language. So they used math instead, the most universal language in existence. One part of the signal confused everyone. It was a soft pulse at the end of each cycle, almost like a signature. It wasn't strong enough to carry information, but it felt like the final tap someone might add after knocking on a door. A small detail, but one that made the researchers feel like they were dealing with something alive, something thoughtful. As days passed, more countries quietly joined the analysis. Meetings were held behind closed doors. Scientists signed confidentiality agreements. The public had no idea anything unusual was happening. If anyone had looked closely at the observatories, they might have noticed increased activity, more lights on at night, more people arriving in unmarked vehicles. But to most people, life looked the same as always. The researcher who first noticed the signal began to feel the pressure. Reporters weren't allowed in, but government officials asked the same questions again and again. Was the signal hostile? Was it a mistake? Was it really coming from so far away? Or was it a trick from another country? The researcher didn't have answers. They could only explain the facts. The signal was not natural. It was repeating. And it was not from Earth. One morning, a scientist from a different country arrived at the observatory with a small team. They had decoded a tiny part of the signal using advanced equipment. What they shared made the room go silent. Inside the pattern, hidden between the repeating shapes, was a kind of star map. It wasn't complete, but it showed several connected points, almost like a route or structure. And Earth's location was on it. Nobody knew whether that was good or bad. It could mean someone was reaching out to us in peace. Or it could mean someone was simply marking our place in the galaxy. The governments coordinating the research didn't want the public to panic, so they instructed everyone to keep working quietly. But silence doesn't make fear disappear. It only hides it. The closer the scientists looked, the more they realized that this signal wasn't random or accidental. It was the first part of something bigger, something planned, something sent with purpose. Some researchers secretly believed the sender wasn't reaching out to greet us, but to evaluate us. They noticed certain details in the pattern that felt almost like scanning or measuring. It was unsettling to think about, but impossible to ignore. The team discussed these ideas privately, never writing them down, because they knew how quickly such thoughts could spiral into fear. Despite the tension, the researcher who discovered the signal remained calm. They kept reminding the team that until the full message was understood, nobody should jump to conclusions. The universe was enormous. Most of it was still a mystery. Something sending a signal didn't automatically mean danger. It could mean curiosity, communication, or something humanity couldn't even imagine yet. But deep down, everyone could feel it. Whatever had sent the signal was far more advanced than anything humans had ever created. And if they could send the message across such an impossible distance, they were powerful. As the first part of the signal continued to repeat every few hours, the world remained unaware of what was happening above them. People went to work, cooked meals, watched their usual shows, and slept peacefully under a night sky that looked the same as always. But for the scientists and a handful of government officials, that quiet sky no longer felt empty. It felt like a doorway, one that someone on the other side had just knocked on. And everyone knew the same thing. This was only the beginning. After the first strange signal shook the scientific community, the atmosphere inside every observatory and research center changed. People still tried to appear calm, still showed up with coffee mugs and tired smiles, but behind their eyes, there was something new, anxiety mixed with curiosity. Everyone wanted answers, but answers were coming slowly, and each discovery only raised more questions. The signal kept repeating from deep space at regular intervals. Every time it appeared, it was exactly the same, as if whoever sent it wanted to make sure it wasn't missed or misunderstood. The scientists had already confirmed it wasn't natural, wasn't local, and wasn't a glitch. But what it actually meant still remained a mystery. Different teams around the world started working on decoding the signal using different technologies. Some used advanced computers, some used mathematical models, and some even used old methods just in case the new ones missed something. Most of the world had no idea any of this was happening. People were going to school, driving to work, planning their weekends, completely unaware that something from the far side of the galaxy had sent a message that included Earth in it. One afternoon, A group of specialists from another country arrived at the main observatory where the first detection had occurred. They carried hard drives, notebooks, and a quiet sense of urgency. They were polite and calm, but it was clear from their serious expressions that they had uncovered something important. They didn't waste time on long greetings. Instead, they plugged in their data and showed what they had discovered. Everyone in the room leaned closer, even those who usually stayed in the back and let the senior researchers handle things. Inside the repeating signal, they had found deeper layers, a kind of pattern hidden beneath the obvious pattern. Think of it like hearing a song and then realizing there's another melody playing softly behind it. At first, it seemed random, but once they enhanced the signal and filtered out the noise, something began to emerge. A map. Not a map with names and borders, but a star map made of points connected with lines. It wasn't a full map of the galaxy, but it showed a cluster of star systems arranged in a specific way. One of those points matched Earth's star, the Sun, and even more unsettling, the point representing Earth wasn't just included, it was highlighted. It glowed stronger than the V. Others in the signal. This discovery changed everything. The scientists stared at the map for a long time. Some sat in silence, some scribbled notes, some simply paced back and forth, trying to process it. There was no way this could be natural. Nature didn't make star maps. Something intelligent had sent it. But why? That was the new question that filled the room. If an advanced civilization wanted to communicate, why not send a direct message? Why hide it inside geometric shapes and strange pulses? Why send something so mysterious? One of the senior researchers suggested that maybe the senders didn't know how to communicate with us in our language, so they used the most universal language they could think of: mathematics. After all, math works everywhere. A circle on Earth is the same as a circle a billion light years away. But even this explanation didn't calm everyone. If they knew enough to send a map across the stars, they must know something about how communication works. Another researcher said something that made the room go quiet. Maybe the map wasn't meant for conversation. Maybe it was simply to show us what they already knew where we were. That idea didn't sit well with anyone. It made the whole thing feel less like a friendly greeting and more like someone marking a point on a chart for later use. Still, nobody wanted to jump to conclusions. Science demanded patience. So they kept working. Over the next few days, research centers in different countries ran the signal through more advanced systems. New layers kept appearing, as if the signal was a puzzle with many hidden pieces. Some parts looked like measurements distances between stars, maybe travel routes. Some parts looked like patterns used for counting. But one thing became more and more obvious. The senders were organized. They weren't drifting aimlessly through space. Their map looked structured, like a government or a system of control. The word empire came up in private discussions. Not in a dramatic way, but simply because it fit. A group with many star systems connected under one power. But nobody dared say it publicly. It would cause panic, and panic was the last thing the world needed. Meanwhile, the government officials who had taken charge of the research were growing impatient. They wanted clear answers. They wanted to know if this was a threat or not. They asked the scientists the same questions repeatedly, hoping for different answers each time. But science didn't work that fast. Understanding something sent from billions of miles away wasn't like solving a crossword puzzle. The scientists felt pressure, but they also felt something deeper, a sense of responsibility. They weren't dealing with just a scientific discovery. They were dealing with something that could affect the entire planet. One evening, after a long day of decoding work, a small team was studying a section of the signal that seemed insignificant at first. It was a series of repeating shapes, triangles, circles, and long lines. But then one of the analysts tilted their head and looked at it differently. almost like flipping the perspective in their mind. Suddenly, they noticed something hidden in the shapes. It wasn't random art. It was instructions, steps, a sequence that seemed to describe movement. When they layered it over the star map, the meaning became clearer. It wasn't just showing locations. It was showing direction. A path. This changed the tone in the room instantly. The map wasn't just a map. It was a route, possibly the route the senders took or planned to take. And if Earth's position was highlighted, that meant the route led here. A wave of silence filled the room. Nobody spoke for several minutes. Some people felt fear. Some felt wonder. Some felt a strange calmness. But everyone understood one thing. This was no accidental message. It was intentional. One researcher finally broke the silence and said softly that the senders might not be trying to talk to us. They might simply be preparing us. Preparing us for what, though? That was the question nobody could answer. As more data came in from other observatories, one thing became clear. The senders were not a small group. If their map was accurate, they had spread across many star systems. That meant they had technology far beyond anything humanity could imagine. They had the ability to travel huge distances. And they knew exactly where Earth was. Some scientists argued that this could be good. Maybe it meant they were explorers or researchers like us, curious about life in the galaxy. Maybe they wanted to share knowledge. Others weren't so hopeful. They pointed out that advanced civilizations don't expand without purpose. Large groups need resources. And when powerful groups expand, weaker ones usually have little say in the matter. But until more decoding was done, nobody knew what the truth was. Behind all the scientific debates, the researcher who first discovered the signal tried to stay focused. They believed that jumping to conclusions would only lead to mistakes. They spent long hours staring at the patterns, trying to understand the intention behind them. There was something thoughtful about the signal, something careful. Whoever sent it wasn't rushing. They were patient, but patience can be frightening. It suggested that the senders were confident, powerful, prepared. As the world slept peacefully each night, the scientists worked under quiet pressure, trying to understand a message sent from across the stars. They didn't know yet that the signal was only the beginning. They didn't know that more transmissions were coming. And they definitely didn't know that one of those future messages would be interpreted not as information, but as a warning. For now, they only knew this. Someone far away had sent a map, and Earth was on it. The days following the discovery of the hidden star map felt heavier than before. The scientists were still working around the clock, but now there was a big difference in their attitude. Earlier, they were curious and excited, but after realizing that the map seemed to show a route pointing straight toward Earth, something shifted. The excitement turned into quiet tension. The laughter they used to share during late-night coffee breaks was replaced by long moments of silence. Nobody wanted to admit how worried they were, but the feeling hung in the air like a weight nobody could lift. Even though the public still had no idea what was happening, the small group of people involved felt like they were carrying a secret much too big for them. It wasn't just a discovery anymore. It felt like responsibility. It felt like the future of the planet depended on how well they understood the next message. The message came sooner than expected. It was late evening when the second transmission arrived. The night sky looked peaceful. The stars were shining quietly, and nothing seemed out of order. Inside the observatory, only a few researchers were working. Half the team had gone home to rest, hoping for at least a few hours of sleep before the next shift. But the universe doesn't follow human schedules. A soft beep echoed from one of the machines, a sound the team had been listening for ever since the first signal arrived. One of the researchers rushed closer and stared at the monitor. The signal pattern was familiar, but this time there was something different, something more complex. The rhythm was longer, the shapes inside the waves sharper, almost deliberate. It felt like whoever was sending it had stepped closer, like a voice at first whispering from far away, now speaking with more clarity. The researcher immediately called the rest of the team. Within minutes, the quiet observatory filled with the sound of rushing footsteps, hurried conversations, and machines being activated. Everyone gathered around the main screen, eyes wide and hands shaking slightly. They all understood what it meant. The senders were continuing whatever they had started. This time, the message was stronger. The pattern repeated, but with variations, almost like someone adding more words to a sentence. There were new geometric shapes, new sequences of numbers, and something else that made the scientists exchange uncomfortable looks. In the signal, layered beneath the shapes, were pulses that changed in a slow, wave-like motion. At first, it seemed random, but once they enhanced it, the meaning became clearer. The waves looked exactly like distortions, caused by massive movement, across a huge distance. It was the same kind of disturbance that appears when large objects travel through space at extremely high speeds. The team stared at the pattern with growing disbelief. These distortions were not natural. They matched the kind of readings that would come from something incredibly large, larger than any human spacecraft moving in deep space. It was almost impossible to believe, but the data matched too perfectly to ignore. If the senders were capable of building something that big, something that could affect space itself, then their technology was far beyond anything humanity had ever dreamed of. The senior researcher took a deep breath and looked around the room. The expressions on the faces around them said everything. Nobody wanted to say the words out loud, but they were all thinking the same thing. This could be a fleet. A massive one. And it might already be moving. News of the second transmission was immediately sent to government officials. This time, the officials arrived faster and in larger numbers. They filled the observatory halls, speaking in low voices, carrying folders, and constantly checking communication devices. They didn't look calm anymore. They looked worried. They asked the scientists the same questions repeatedly. Was this movement directed toward Earth? Was it peaceful? Was it dangerous? Could we communicate back? But the scientists didn't know. They only knew what the data showed, that something enormous was moving through deep space, and it was connected to the same star map that highlighted Earth. The message needed to be decoded quickly. In the following days, research teams around the world worked like never before. They slept only a few hours, spent most of their time staring at screens, and barely talked about anything except the signal. Even though they were tired, their minds kept running, trying to understand what the senders wanted. Slowly, bits of meaning began to appear in the second message. The geometric shapes this time looked more organized. Some formed patterns similar to diagrams. Others resembled measurement charts, as if the senders were describing something about themselves, their structure, their strength, or their capabilities. One shape looked like a symbol, something they repeated again and again. It didn't match anything humans had seen before, so the scientists didn't know if it was a name, a warning, or some kind of identification. The strangest part came from the linguistic specialists. They weren't studying language in the usual sense, because there were no words or letters. But even patterns can have meaning. And after running the second transmission through advanced linguistic models, something unexpected showed up. The signal had two layers, one organized and purposeful, and another that seemed chaotic at first, but wasn't. It was like someone had hidden a smaller message inside the bigger message. The second hidden layer was softer, weaker, almost like someone trying to whisper behind the main speaker. The linguistics team shared this with the scientists, and everyone became silent again. Why would a message have two voices? One possibility scared them the most. What if the first voice belonged to the powerful group, the empire shown on the star map, and the second voice belonged to someone else? Someone trying to tell Earth something quietly, without the Empire noticing? They listened closely to the hidden layer. At first, it didn't make sense. But after hours of analysis, parts of it began to resemble signals known to represent caution in different scientific systems. Not danger, not attack, just caution. A kind of universal be careful. A soft warning that changed everything. If the second layer was truly a warning, it meant someone out there believed the Empire's message was not good for Earth. Maybe the Empire wasn't sending a greeting. Maybe they were scouting, studying, preparing for something. Meanwhile, governments became more restless. They started organizing emergency meetings across different countries. They asked space agencies to track any unusual movements in deep space. Large satellite arrays were pointed toward the part of the sky the signals came from. Everyone hoped they would find nothing. Everyone feared they would find something. A week later, something did appear. It wasn't clear, and it wasn't close. But the largest satellite network detected faint anomalies far beyond the edge of the solar system. They weren't objects exactly, but disruptions like ripples in a pond. They matched the kind of disturbances seen in the second message. The scientists shared this news with the officials, and the room fell completely silent. It was the kind of silence that carries fear. Nobody knew what was coming. Nobody knew when it would arrive. Nobody even knew if arrival was the right word. But the evidence was too clear to deny. Something enormous was moving, and it was getting closer, even if slowly. The senior researcher tried to keep the team calm. They reminded everyone that not all contact had to be harmful. Maybe this civilization was simply advanced and curious. Maybe the warning was about something else. The universe was still full of mysteries. But deep down, they also felt the truth pressing in. The second message was not just information. It was confirmation. The senders knew about Earth. They had made their presence clearer. And someone out there had tried to warn us quietly from behind the main transmission. That night, after most of the officials left and the lights in the observatory became dim, the senior researcher stood alone by the window. The sky looked peaceful, the stars twinkling gently, as if nothing unusual was happening. But for the first time in their life, the researcher felt the sky wasn't just beautiful, it was watching. The next message would decide everything. And nobody knew how much time Earth had before it arrived. The third transmission arrived on a quiet morning when the observatory staff least expected it. Unlike the first two signals, which had come at night, this one appeared as the sun was rising. A soft alert sound echoed through the control room, but it wasn't the usual alert. It was sharper, louder, like the machines had learned to recognize the pattern and were warning the researchers with more urgency. The first researcher to check the screen froze for a moment. The new signal wasn't long. It wasn't complex. It wasn't layered like the previous ones. It was short, very short. Just a few repeating pulses followed by a pattern that looked strangely familiar. The entire team was called in immediately. People rushed in with half-finished cups of tea, notebooks falling from their hands, hair uncombed, still blinking away sleep. When they saw the new signal, their tiredness vanished instantly. The message looked like a countdown. No words, no detailed maps, no hidden layers. Just a repeating sequence that grew shorter each cycle, like someone tapping on a door faster and faster. At first, nobody wanted to admit what it looked like. They tried to treat it as just another code that needed to be decoded. But deep down, the human mind recognizes certain patterns instantly. And everyone knew what countdown behavior looked like. The pulses came in sets, decreasing slightly with each repetition. But countdown to what? Arrival? An event? A warning? Nobody knew. The signal also carried another striking feature, a symbol. It appeared right after each set of pulses. A simple shape almost like a triangle inside a circle, with a line cutting through it. No one had seen anything like it before, but something about it felt universal. Like a sign meant to catch attention no matter who saw it. One researcher whispered, "It almost looks like a caution sign." Another replied softly, "Or a hazard symbol." That word hazard floated through the room like a cold breeze. Everyone heard it, nobody liked it, and nobody wanted to repeat it. The linguistics team ran the symbol through every database of known shapes, languages, and symbols. Nothing matched perfectly, but the closest results were all forms of warning signs humans use to mark dangerous areas, fragile systems, or things that require careful handling. It wasn't enough to claim the symbol meant danger, but it wasn't comforting either. While the scientists worked on decoding the rest of the message, government officials filled the hallway outside the observatory. Their voices were sharp and worried. They asked the scientists if they were sure the message was a countdown. The scientists tried to explain that they only knew the structure, not the full meaning. But the officials didn't want possibilities. They wanted clear answers, something that could guide their next decisions. Nobody could give them that. Meanwhile, the hidden second layer from the previous signal hadn't reappeared. There was no soft whisper this time. No quiet attempt at communication behind the main transmission. That made the researchers even more uneasy. It almost felt like whoever had tried to warn Earth earlier was no longer able to. Or maybe they didn't dare interrupt this message. As the scientists studied deeper, a new possibility emerged, one that made the room fall quiet once again. The message didn't look like a threat. It looked like a notice, a type of announcement, something civilizations might send before arriving near a new planet or region. Not aggressive, not friendly, just formal, like a distant authority acknowledging its approach. One researcher explained it this way: "It's like when ships long ago signaled to ports before entering. They weren't saying they came to harm anyone, but they still sent a warning bell before arriving." That idea brought temporary relief, but only for a moment. Because the next question was worse. Why would someone need to announce their arrival from so far away? If the sender was truly as advanced as the signal suggested, they could probably travel at unimaginable speeds. And if that was the case, then sending a message ahead of time only meant one thing: they were confident enough to make their intentions clear without worrying about how Earth might react. Outside the observatory, discussions became more intense. The world's leaders held private video meetings day and night. Some insisted the message meant danger and that the planet should prepare. Others argued that assuming it was hostile could make things worse. A few believed the symbols might be misunderstood and that communication with the senders could be peaceful. But everyone agreed on one thing: they couldn't keep the information hidden much longer. If more signals arrived, or if deep space disturbances grew stronger, the truth would leak, and people would demand explanations. Inside the labs, the scientists worked on the deeper layers of the third message. Though it was short, it wasn't simple. After hours of decoding, they discovered a final piece that shocked everyone. Hidden inside the countdown like pulses was a smaller fragment, just a small section of the signal that didn't match the main message. When enhanced, it didn't show shapes or maps. It only showed a single set of coordinates. And those coordinates pointed to something unexpected. They weren't pointing at Earth, and they weren't pointing at the Empire's territory. They pointed somewhere else. Entirely a place in deep space with no known planets. No stars bright enough to observe in detail. A dark, quiet region. At first, the researchers were confused. Why would someone send coordinates to an empty place? But then they realized the coordinates weren't meant to show a location. They were meant to show a point of communication, a kind of safe channel, a place from which messages could be exchanged without interference. That changed the mood instantly. This wasn't just a notice. It wasn't an attack. It wasn't a countdown to destruction. It was a warning. One of the analysts said quietly, "Maybe someone wants us to respond. Maybe this is the only chance we get before they arrive." The governments were informed immediately. Within hours, a confidential document was shared among the world's top leaders. The conclusion was simple but heavy. The third transmission contained a single opportunity, a communication point meant for Earth to reply before the approaching civilization got too close. The document didn't say how much time Earth had. It didn't say whether the Empire was friendly or dangerous. It simply said, "This may be our sole warning." Those words spread through government circles like fire. Suddenly, the situation shifted from analysis to action. The question was no longer, "What does the signal mean?" but "What do we do now?" Back in the observatory, the researchers sat quietly around the main console. For days, they had been decoding signals from a distant civilization. Now, for the first time, they had to decide how humanity should answer. But answering wasn't simple. To reply. The planet needed a powerful transmission system, far more powerful than anything used for normal space communication. It would require building or modifying equipment, coordinating multiple nations, and agreeing on what to say. Every message humans sent would be recorded forever in cosmic history. And every word would reflect the entire planet. The scientists felt the pressure heavy on their shoulders. They weren't politicians. They weren't leaders. They were just people who loved space and science. But now, the world needed them to help craft a message that might shape the future of humanity. Some suggested a message of peace. Some wanted to ask questions. Some thought Earth should simply acknowledge the signal. A few believed silence was safer. Nobody could agree. As the discussions continued, the countdown like pulses repeated again in the observatory speakers. Each cycle reminded them that time was moving forward, whether humanity was ready or not. One of the researchers stood near the window, staring at the morning sky. The sun was rising. Birds were flying peacefully. People outside were beginning their normal day, completely unaware that far beyond the blue sky, something enormous was moving toward Earth. The researcher whispered softly, "We're running out of time." Everyone knew it was true. The third message was short, but it changed everything. The quiet warning hidden inside, it had given Earth a single chance to respond, a single chance to prepare. The world didn't know it yet, but humanity had just received its only warning. When the warning finally reached the public, the world reacted in a way no one could fully predict. For weeks, information had been leaking slowly, small hints shared by people working in observatories, small whispers from government employees, strange posts on social media. But now the situation had reached a point where hiding everything was no longer possible. The truth was too big, too loud, and too close to ignore. People everywhere woke up to a quiet tension in the air. News channels that usually talked about politics, sports, or entertainment were suddenly filled with discussions about strange signals from deep space. Some presenters tried to speak calmly, choosing their words carefully, while others looked openly nervous. They said that scientists around the world had confirmed unusual movements in a faraway region of the galaxy. They said that something large, maybe several things, were traveling through space with a clear direction and purpose. And they said that Earth had been specifically marked in a message received earlier. No. One used words like danger or attack. They knew the power of such terms. They knew panic could spread faster than any spaceship. But even without such words, the meaning was clear enough. Something powerful was coming, and Earth had to be ready. Across major cities, people gathered in small groups, talking in worried voices. Some stood outside cafes with cups of tea that had gone cold in their hands. Others waited at bus stops without noticing the buses arriving and leaving. Everyone tried to act normal, but their eyes kept drifting upward toward the sky, as if expecting something to appear. Inside homes, families sat together watching the news, holding hands without realizing it. Parents tried to reassure their children, saying everything would be okay, that scientists were working on it, that nothing bad would happen. Children believed them, but adults knew the truth. They themselves were not sure. Governments in every country were under pressure. People demanded clarity, but leaders struggled to give answers. They themselves had limited information, and the information they did have was too unbelievable for many to accept. They decided to release part of the truth, not because they wanted to, but because they had no choice. Too many individuals already knew something was happening. Too many posts were circulating online. Silence would only make things worse. A short broadcast was released by a global council. It explained that several scientific teams had detected unusual space activity. It mentioned signals, but only briefly. It confirmed that an unknown civilization might be communicating. However, it did not mention the phrase Galactic Empire, or the fact that the message seemed targeted. Even then, the world understood enough to feel shaken. What truly changed everything was not the announcement, but what happened afterward. Several independent astronomers, who were not controlled by any government, began to share images taken from their own telescopes. These images were blurry and distant, but even an untrained eye could sense they were not normal. Some looked like enormous structure shapes, too straight, too organized, too large to be natural. Others looked like clusters of moving points that shifted in perfect formation. People stared at the pictures, zoomed in, zoomed out, and asked the same question. What is that? Some doubted the images, saying they might be edited. But when the same pictures were posted by different astronomers from different countries, with different equipment, the doubt slowly faded. On social media, thousands of comments appeared every minute. Some people tried to make jokes to calm themselves. Some argued. Some prayed. Some shared their fears openly. A few expressed excitement, hoping this would lead to a new age of discovery. But no one could ignore the heavy feeling that something extraordinary was happening far beyond Earth's atmosphere. Amid all this, the scientific community worked harder than ever. Research centers were filled with tired faces, glowing screens, and empty coffee cups. People who had never worked together before formed teams overnight. Data was shared faster than any previous time in history. Everyone knew what was at stake, and competition disappeared. Only cooperation mattered now. One of the leading figures, the same researcher who had first recognized the pattern in the signal, found herself suddenly at the center of global attention. She had once worked quietly, speaking only to her colleagues, spending long nights in front of computers and instruments. Now she received messages from government officials, journalists, and even children who wanted to understand what was happening. Although she did not want to become a public figure, she stepped into the role because she understood the responsibility. People needed someone who could explain things calmly, someone who used simple language without making the situation sound hopeless. So she appeared in interviews, giving careful answers. She spoke with honesty, but also with hope. She emphasized unity, saying that humanity had faced many challenges before, and cooperation had always been the key. Her voice became one of the few that people trusted. To address the situation more directly. Space agencies of the world formed a joint group named Project Sentinel. Scientists, engineers, analysts, communication experts, and security teams came together with one goal: to monitor the approaching activity and prepare Earth's response. They built new tracking systems, upgraded telescopes, and shared data openly among nations. For the first time in decades, countries that had complicated histories agreed to work side by side. The project created daily briefings, studying every signal, every movement, every bright or dark patch of deep space that might reveal more information. They also worked on drafts of possible replies messages humanity might send back to the unknown civilization, hoping to show peaceful intentions. Some teams developed mathematical patterns that could express friendship or curiosity. Others studied the earlier signals to understand their meaning more clearly. A few groups tried to detect whether the warning sent earlier truly came from another civilization, as suspected. There were so many questions and so few answers. Meanwhile, ordinary citizens tried to adapt to the new reality. Schools taught students basic facts about space and communication. Instead of scary descriptions, teachers used gentle explanations, focusing on how humans were learning something new about the universe. Community centers organized events where people could talk about their concerns, helping each other stay calm. In many places, strangers who had never spoken to each other before began sharing conversations on buses, in parks, and in shops, everyone united by the same uncertainty. The world did not stop functioning. People still went to work. Shops still opened. Buses still ran on schedule. But everything felt slightly slower, slightly more serious. Even laughter sounded different, softer, a little more thoughtful. Still, not everything was peaceful. Some people reacted with fear, spreading false theories online or claiming that the world was ending. Others blamed governments for hiding information too long. A small number of people prepared for the worst, gathering supplies in case something happened. But these reactions were small compared to the larger movement of global cooperation. One evening, something unexpected happened that brought renewed anxiety. A new set of images appeared from a telescope positioned in a remote region far from city lights. These images showed a faint glow in space, shaped like a massive arc. Scientists debated whether it was a reflection, a dust field, or something else entirely. But one detail made their hearts race each day. The arc shifted closer to the solar system, following a consistent path. The glow was still extremely far away, but it was moving. And whatever it was enormous. The world learned of the glow within hours. News channels displayed the images, experts discussed possibilities carefully, and people watched with silent concern. Yet even in this tense moment, there was something powerful hidden beneath the fear, a sense of unity the planet had not experienced in a very long time. People began treating each other more kindly, understanding that everyone was facing the same unknown future. Neighbors shared food. Communities helped those who felt overwhelmed. Citizens supported scientists and leaders. And in the middle of all this, hope quietly grew. Hope that whatever was coming, humanity would face it together. As days passed, Project Sentinel continued sending updates. They reminded the world that not all unknown things are threats. They emphasized that Earth was sending peaceful signals, trying to communicate, trying to establish understanding. They shared news that the glow had consistent patterns that suggested construction, movement, or organization. It was not just a random cloud of gas. It was something created. And still, no message came from the approaching presence. Not yet. People waited, watched, listened, and hoped. And deep in the control rooms of Project Sentinel, where screens flickered softly and tired workers whispered updates to one another, the team prepared for the moment when the approaching glow would reveal its true nature. Because, whether good or bad, that moment was coming, and Earth was no longer the same planet it had been before the warning arrived. When the final fragment of the message was decoded, the atmosphere inside the Project Sentinel command center changed completely. For weeks, tension had filled the rooms, but now something new replaced it, a sharp, intense silence. It was the kind of silence that comes when people realize they are standing at a turning point in history, a moment their grandchildren might one day read about. The decoded fragment was small, just a few lines of strange symbols and repeating patterns. At first glance, it looked almost meaningless. But after days of careful study, the researchers figured out something surprising. The message was not a warning about destruction. It was not a countdown to danger. It was a set of coordinates pointing toward a specific point in deep space where Earth could send a reply. This discovery brought a sudden wave of relief to some people and fresh anxiety to others. If the coordinates were real, it meant the unknown civilization wanted communication. But it also meant they were listening. They were waiting. And they had chosen Earth for a reason no one fully understood. Scientists worked nonstop to confirm the coordinates, running calculations again and again to make sure no mistake had been made. Every time the numbers were checked, they came out exactly the same. The message was clear. Humanity needed to respond and respond soon. Inside the command center, screens displayed complex models of deep space. One section glowed softly, the location where Earth was supposed to send its reply. It wasn't anywhere near the solar system. It wasn't even close to nearby stars. It was somewhere far beyond, in a region humans had barely studied. The idea of sending a signal there felt almost impossible. The signal would need to be powerful enough to cross vast distances and still remain clear. Engineers gathered in long meetings, sketching diagrams on whiteboards, arguing gently, suggesting new ideas. After hours of discussion, they reached one conclusion. Earth needed a new kind of beacon. Not a normal radio transmitter. Not something already built. Something far more powerful. So the construction of the beacon began. It was built on a large, quiet piece of land far from crowded cities. Workers set up tall structures, cables, dishes, giant panels, and machines that hummed low vibrations through the ground. The project moved faster than anything the world had seen before. Countries that usually argued over small disagreements now offered their facilities and equipment without hesitation. Scientists who had never met before worked side by side like old friends. Every day, the beacon grew taller, stronger, closer to completion. As the beacon took shape, people around the world followed every update closely. News channels aired daily progress reports. Children created drawings of it. Elderly people prayed for its success. There was fear, yes, but there was also hope, more hope than anyone had expected. At night, when the workers rested, many of them found themselves staring at the sky. They wondered who or what might be waiting for Earth's reply. They wondered whether the unknown civilization was kind, curious, or simply powerful beyond anything humans could imagine. None of them knew the answer, but they continued working because they understood how important this moment was. Meanwhile, deep space sensors picked up new activity. The faint glow that had worried scientists earlier was still moving through the darkness. It was closer now, but still too far to fully see. Some days it seemed to pause, growing dimmer. Other days it brightened slightly, as if turning. No one could agree on what it meant. One afternoon, a group of astronomers gathered around a screen showing updated readings. They spoke in quiet tones, each line on the screen representing unknown movement. They noticed something strange. The pattern of the glow matched a piece of the very first signal Earth had received. The realization hit them all at the same time. The glowing arc was not just moving randomly. It was following a path that pointed toward the solar system. But it was still too far to reach Earth anytime soon. This information was shared with the public in a calm, careful manner. Scientists explained that whatever was moving was still incredibly distant. They also repeated that no sign of hostility had been detected. The intention remained unknown, but the speed of the approach suggested that whatever was coming was not rushing toward Earth. It was traveling slowly, deliberately. That gave humanity time. Time to finish the beacon. Time to prepare a reply. Time to show unity. The message Earth planned to send was not decided by one country or one leader. It was written by a team of linguists, scientists, communication experts, and peace advocates. The goal was simple: send a message that expressed curiosity, respect, and peaceful intention. The message was designed using patterns similar to those found in the received signals, so the civilization on the other side could understand it. It included mathematical sequences, symbols that represented Earth's location, and a soft rhythmic pattern that suggested friendship. No human language was used. Words could be misunderstood. Emotions could be misread. But mathematics was universal. Patterns were universal. As the beacon neared completion, the world watched with held breath. People paused conversations when they saw it on screens. Teachers paused their lessons. Workers paused their tasks. Everyone felt the same mix of fear and excitement. Finally, the day arrived. The sky above the beacon was clear, as if nature itself understood the importance of the moment. The long structures shimmered in the sunlight. Engineers stepped back from their stations. Scientists checked their final readings. Reporters whispered into microphones. People across the world tuned in through their phones. TVs, radios, and laptops. Inside the command center. The lead researcher, the same one who had first recognized the signal, stood quietly, watching the screens. She didn't give a long speech. She didn't say dramatic words. She simply nodded to the team. The reply message was activated. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the beacon lit up, emitting a powerful pulse that vibrated gently through the ground. A soft hum filled the air, not loud, not frightening, just steady and calm. The message traveled upward, invisible to the human eye, moving past the atmosphere, past the moon, past the planets, and into the vastness of space. People watching around the world did not cheer loudly. Instead, they felt a deep, quiet emotion, like witnessing something sacred. After months of fear, confusion, and uncertainty, humanity had finally spoken. The beacon continued sending the message again and again, each pulse stretching farther into the universe. Scientists calculated how long it would take to reach the coordinates given in the fragment. It would be many days before the signal arrived, and even longer before any reply could come back. After the message was sent, the world settled into a strange calm. Most people went back to their daily routines, but something had changed inside them. They felt more connected to each other, more aware that Earth was not alone in the universe. They listened to updates from Project Sentinel the way people listen to heartbeats carefully, hoping for good news. Days passed. The glowing object in deep space continued its slow approach, still far beyond reach, but no longer just a mystery. Some scientists believed it was a fleet. Others thought it was a structure, a giant moving city. A few believed it was simply a signal relay. No one knew for sure. Then, one night, something new happened. Deep space sensors detected a faint flicker. It was small, barely noticeable at first. But within minutes, it grew stronger. It came from the same coordinates where Earth had sent its message. The flicker grew brighter, then steadied into a clean, sharp pattern. A reply, the first reply Earth had received since the original warnings. The command center erupted in movement. People rushed to their stations, adjusting equipment, collecting data, analyzing patterns. The flicker continued, sending signals that looked similar to the earlier ones, but different in a subtle, deliberate way. The structure of the message was clearer, smoother, almost as if the sender was acknowledging Earth's effort to communicate. People around the world waited for scientists to decode it. Social media exploded with questions. News channels covered the event live. Neighbors gathered outside to look at the sky, even though nothing visible could be seen. Finally, after hours of work, the scientists shared their first interpretation. The reply was simple. Not a warning. Not a threat. Not a countdown. It was a confirmation. A confirmation that Earth's message had been received. A confirmation that the path of communication was open. A confirmation that humanity was no longer speaking into the darkness, somewhere far beyond the stars. The Galactic Empire, or whatever name they used for themselves, had heard Earth's voice, and they had answered. The world felt a soft wave of emotion wash over it. People cried, laughed, hugged, or simply stared at the sky in silence. For the first time in months, fear loosened its grip. The unknown was still vast, still mysterious, still possibly dangerous, but the door to understanding had opened. Humanity had taken its first step into a larger universe. And the universe had stepped forward too. No one knew what would happen next, whether the approaching glow was a friend, a visitor, or a powerful civilization simply observing Earth. But one thing was certain. The story of Earth had changed forever. And this time, the whole world was ready to face whatever came next together.